Good morning. Good Sunday morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. America and the world honors President George H.W. Bush this weekend, a lifelong leader, dedicated public servant, and family man. House Republicans tangle with Jim Comey over answering questions on Capitol Hill this week, and the U.S. and China strike a temporary truce on trade. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Maria Bartiromo. This is Sunday Morning Futures. Tributes have been pouring in for the 41st President of the United States as our nation prepares to honor George H.W. Bush this week. And we learn new details about the funeral arrangements coming up. We will get reflections from the man President Bush chose as his running mate. Former Vice President Dan Quayle joins me now in an exclusive interview coming up. A judge could decide tomorrow whether James Comey will appear publicly or privately before lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Will House Republicans finally get the answers they've been seeking for nearly 2 years? I'll speak exclusively with House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte. And President Trump and Xi strike a tentative deal on trade just a day after the American president signed a new trade with the leaders of Mexico and Canada. Will Democrats work with the president in the wake of these negotiations? An incoming member of the House Democratic leadership, Congressman Matt Cartwright, is with me talking about that and the possibility of a partial government shutdown on the horizon as we look ahead right now on Sunday Morning Futures. And we begin this Sunday morning with remembering the life and legacy of George Herbert Walker Bush. The war hero and 41st President of the United States died on Friday night at the age of 94. He is being remembered as a man of uncommon decency and kindness across the political spectrum this weekend. A loving father and husband who devoted his life to his family and country. Beginning tomorrow, the nation will get to say their final farewells to the former president when he lie in state in the U.S. Capitol before he is laid to rest back home in Texas later this week. Joining me right now in an exclusive interview to share his memories of the late president is Dan Quayle, former vice president under George H.W. Bush. Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
My condolences to you and his family. Share with us what you remember of President H.W.
Well, you said it all in the introduction. I mean, George Bush was just absolutely the best. He was a great individual, in my opinion, a great president. He loved his family. He loved his work. He loved the country. And it was such an honor for me to work with him every single day that he was president, I was vice president for the American people. And a lot of folks, you know, they ask me, well, what's the legacy? I said, you know, that's a tough question. Historians will sort that out. But in my view, his legacy, Maria, was accomplishments. He got things done. When he left office, the economy was growing at 5–6%. You know, the Berlin Wall came down. Eastern and Central Europe freed from the yoke of communism. Apartheid in South Africa was eliminated. Success in putting Saddam Hussein back into Iraq. Noriega apprehended. So many things in a short period of time, and the domestic front as well. So accomplishments. He did so much in 4 years.
He really did. He left the country in a better place than when he arrived. And when he first chose you as his running mate, you wrote an op-ed in the Journal. George Bush, Be Prepared and Be Loyal was the title of that. You talked about after yourself and the president were inaugurated on January 20th, 1989, and he discussed Ronald Reagan a bit to you. As Ronald Reagan left, why did you choose those words, be prepared and loyal? He said that to you.
He did. We talked about, you know, what the Quayle model would be. I said, look, I very much like the Bush model. And he says, no, you have your own model. You'll do your thing. It'll be different than mine. I was very, very fortunate to not only work with him as a great individual, but he had been vice president for 8 years. And he knew the good things about being vice president and the not so good things about being vice president. So that was a blessing from my perspective. But what he said to me on the steps of the Capitol as we said goodbye to Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, he turned to me and in sort of his, you know, low voice, he says, that man was very good to me. And I can say that today, that man, George Bush, was very good to me.
Oh, how wonderful. And you were just 41 years old when you first were in the job, but you had been in Congress for a long time, since you were 29, so you had a great perspective in terms of the congressional dealings. How did President Bush deal with the Congress in terms of the different factions and determinations on each sides of the aisle?
Well, it's interesting because we had a Democrat Congress. So, we had to deal with Speaker Foley. We had to deal with Majority Leader George Mitchell. So we had to reach across the aisle to get support for what we wanted to do. And look at what we did. We got budgets passed, clean air, comprehensive clean air legislation, disabilities. And then the resolution from the Congress, and particularly in the Senate, the House was easy to go and take Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait and put him back into Iraq, because we had to pick up 10 Democrats in the United States Senate to support us to get a majority vote. And we had the Majority Leader, George Mitchell, was opposed to us. We had the Chairman of the Senate Armed Services, Sam Nunn, was opposed to us. We had a lot of very important people in the Senate that were opposed to us on this resolution. And so we had to work hard to get Democrats to support us. And, sometimes divided government works. It clearly worked in our administration, and you can get things done if you reach across the aisle and work hard. And
even on a personal level, he did things without theatrics or drama. President Bush died nearly 7.5 months after his wife of 73 years, Barbara Bush, passed. Not long after his mother's passing, I had the opportunity to talk with President George W. Bush and former First Lady Laura Bush about the bond between the elder Bush couple. Watch this.
I love the fact that she was married to your father for 73 years.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, he was by her side, by the way, when she passed.
He said that.
Which is sweet, yeah.
And we have a love letter that he wrote to her that we have been talking about this morning from World War II in 1943, penned by your father, and it's going viral this morning, obviously. And it says, it reads in part, "This may sound melodramatic, but if it does, it is only my inadequacy to say what I mean. Bar, you have made my life full of everything I could ever dream of. My complete happiness should be a token of my love for you."
Yeah.
Were they just just like a love affair all the time? I mean, in
it seemed that way,
They really were.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
great example. They were best friends, weren't they, Mr. Vice President? Did you see that as well?
Yeah, so actually one of the last times that I saw the President and Barbara together was 2 years ago up at Kennebunkport. I used to go up there every summer and have a lunch with them. And they serve a great lobster, and they have a little white wine. It's a wonderful lunch, just the three of us. And the last time I was there, Barbara was carrying on the conversation. The President would chime in when he wanted to. But you could just see the love and the sparkle, even though he was, having some physical difficulties. She was fabulous. He was great. I mean, what a couple.
Yeah, and it's incredible to mention the economy and the growth that we saw, almost 6%, more than 6% at one point during his presidency, and yet it was only one term.
Yes, that was unfortunate. A lot of blame to go around. I'll take my fair share. But Ross Perot did get 19% of the vote.
Right.
There was a perception that the economy wasn't doing as well as it should, but yet it was growing at 6% when we left office. You also had a little bit of perhaps Republican fatigue. We'd been in power for 12 years. The American people like change. It was a hard-fought campaign. By looking back on it, I think we could have won 3 or 4 days before the election. I think we could have won 3 or 4 days after the election. But guess what? You have to win on election day, and therefore I was a fairly young, retired former Vice President of the United States.
President Trump yesterday in Argentina said that he will be, after he comes home, which now he is home, he's sending Air Force One back to pick up the casket and then bring George H.W. back to Texas at the end of really the celebrations this week of his life. Let me get your sense of what's happening today, because you say that people wanted change. They certainly did vote for change in 2016 with Donald Trump. Here we are, game on into 2020 with the Democrats lining up for their candidate. How do you see the state of play, if you will, today?
Well, today I think that President Trump would probably be the favorite, but there are three unknowns, Maria, three. One, we don't know who the Democrats are going to put up. Will they put up Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren type person? We'll have to wait and see. Two, I don't know what the state of the economy will be in 2020. It's good now. We're a long way away. Nobody can really predict what it's going to be in 2020, and the economy is obviously key. President Trump ran on that, bringing jobs back to America, increasing wages for the workers. It's all good right now. What's it going to be in 2020? Then the third unknown is the Mueller investigation and the investigation in the Southern District of New York. We just don't know. So those are three unknowns that you will be examining and others will to determine who the president will be in 2020.
Yeah, you make a really good point, particularly on the economy, because a lot of people now are predicting that things will slow quite considerably, perhaps even tinker with the recession come 2020. And that's obviously when people are going to be going out to vote.
Well, if the economy slips, then it'll be a real challenge for President Trump. The one thing, and his strategists know this, that he does have to expand the base. Now, how he goes about that, we'll have to wait and see. But the base is firm, it's strong, it's solid, but it has to be expanded, in my opinion, for him to be successful.
Yeah.
But we don't know about the economy, and the economy is always important. But Obama proved us that you could not have a good economy and still be successful. When he ran in 12, the economy, unemployment was what, 9%?
That's right. Yeah.
9%, and he got reelected. So, you know, we'll have to wait and see. Every election is different.
Really important points that you make. Mr. Vice President, it's a pleasure to see you and have you on the program. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Dan Quayle joining us there. Meanwhile, Jim Comey is locked in a legal battle with the House Judiciary Committee this morning as Republicans seek a closed-door testimony from the former FBI director. I have an exclusive interview next up with the chairman of that committee, Virginia Congressman Bob Goodlatte, will join me next on why he says Comey is seeking special treatment, not transparency. Follow me on Twitter at Maria Bartiromo at Sunday Futures. Let us know what you'd like to hear from Bob Goodlatte and Ken Starr coming up as well. Stay with us as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Future. Welcome back. James Comey filing a lawsuit against a GOP subpoena, calling for him to testify behind closed doors. The former FBI director is insisting that he appear in a public hearing for the sake of transparency. My next guest says that Comey is demanding special treatment and trying to run out the clock until the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees shift to Democratic control come January. Joining me right now in a Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is Republican Congressman from Virginia, Bob Goodlatte. He is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you, Maria, and your viewers.
Do you really think you are going to be able to speak to Jim Comey this upcoming week, sir?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I expect that later today, Mr. Comey will withdraw his motion to quash our subpoena and agree to voluntarily appear for a transcribed interview. That, of course, remains to be seen. It hasn't happened yet, but the counsel for the House and the counsel for Mr. Comey have been working cooperatively, and I expect that will happen. If it doesn't, there's a hearing set tomorrow morning, and based upon the precedent, including very clear United States Supreme Court precedent, I'm confident the court will rule in favor of the House and protect the House's right to issue subpoenas and not allow witnesses to dictate the terms under which they would appear before the Congress.
Well, let me just go back to what you just said, because this is breaking news. You are expecting Jim Comey to withdraw his motion to push back and, in fact, sit for a private hearing sometime later this week. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's the expectation. That's been the basis of discussions that are going on, and we'll await it actually happening, but that is what I believe will happen.
Why do you believe this?
Because the parties have been working together. I think that the strength of the presentation made by Tom Hungar, the House counsel, on Friday, and the House's brief is very compelling, and I think that that is where the parties are headed in their discussions right now.
Where is this going to get you regardless, Mr. Chairman? I mean, look, in all due respect, we have been with you, this program has, all year, as you have scrutinized the handling of the Hillary Clinton investigation and the Trump-Russia collusion investigations of the FBI and the DOJ. And here we are, literally 3 or 4 weeks before you step down, and now you subpoena these two. I mean, couldn't you have done this sooner? What took so long?
Well, we certainly couldn't have done it sooner. We've now examined thousands of pages of documents, searched through nearly 1 million documents, interviewed 16 other witnesses. Mr. Comey is, as the former FBI director, at the center of both of these investigations, launched in 2016 with regard to Hillary Clinton and the Trump campaign. And it's the culmination of that. We've been asking for Mr. Comey to appear for a few months now, and when he refused to appear voluntarily for a transcribed interview, I was forced to issue a subpoena, which he now has sought to quash. That's, in my opinion, inappropriate, and now it's time for us to conduct that interview. After that interview, we do need to wrap up, but I will also say that there are always more questions that people will have, and that's why I'm pleased that Senator Lindsey Graham, who's expected to be the next chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Chairman Ron Johnson of the Senate Oversight Committee have both expressed very strong interest and intentions to me to continue to pursue this matter. So we do need to wrap it up. We do need to get this information out to the public, and we are hard at work on doing that. But Mr. Comey's testimony is a critical part of that.
What are you going to find out from Jim Comey? What are the most important questions you need to ask him?
Well, I'm going to save those for Mr. Comey, but you can imagine that you have a 400-page Inspector General's report. You have the testimony of 16 other witnesses, all of which were taken in private transcribed interviews. You have the thousands of pages of documents. Those have generated literally hundreds of questions that need to be asked, and we are prepared now with some very experienced former prosecutors like Trey Gowdy and John Ratcliffe and very experienced investigative staff to ask those questions and get to the bottom of this answer. We want to follow this matter. We want to follow the truth where it leads, and then we want to make these transcripts available to the public so that they can draw their own conclusions about what occurred in 2016. I'm concerned, and it's my hope that by doing this, we will prevent it from happening again in 2020 or hopefully ever again. The FBI was misused in 2016, and this is an organization that is very, very important. Every day, thousands and thousands of great FBI agents and others protect us from terrorist attacks, prevent crimes, solve crimes. This organization has been hit hard, and they need to be rehabilitated. And let me just say, Christopher Wray, the new FBI director, I think has done a job of making major personnel changes at the top, and in terms of taking the Inspector General's report to heart and making changes so that this kind of thing won't happen again.
Mr. Chairman, stay with us because we've got more to talk about on this, as well as want to get your upcoming comments that you're going to be talking with the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, as well, on whether conservatives are being censored online. We'll get your take on a potential government shutdown as well. Stay with us. More with Bob Goodlatte when we come right back on Sunday Morning Feud. I'm back with House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte. And Mr. Chairman, you just told us that you are expecting Jim Comey to withdraw his motion not to appear and, in fact, to appear in front of your committee later this week.
That's correct. That's where the discussions are headed. I think that will be made official with the court soon. If for any reason it doesn't happen, then the parties will be back in court tomorrow morning. And as I indicated earlier, I think that the legal precedents are very, very powerful. This no district judge has ever quashed a subpoena issued by the House Representatives, and the Supreme Court has been very clear on the sanctity of those subpoenas.
Jim Comey's talked a lot about going public versus private. Explain the difference, because I know that if you're in a private setting, he can just say, oh, that question is confidential and classified, I can't answer it. So can you get more answers in a private setting versus a public setting?
Yes, because the format is one where our counsel will ask questions for an hour. The Democrats will have an opportunity to ask questions for an hour, then back to the Republicans, and back and forth until all the questions have been asked that need to be asked. Whereas in a public hearing, if people have watched those, they know that each member gets 5 minutes. You can't even ask more than 2 or 3 questions, and certainly can't ask any follow-up questions in that fashion. So someone like Trey Gowdy or John Ratcliffe, who are experienced prosecutors, and others who are experienced investigators, can't pursue the long lines of questions that need to take place. That's why this needs to be done in that setting. However, we share Mr. Comey's interest in transparency. We expect all of these interviews that we have transcribed thus far to be made public, but we have committed to making his public very quickly after the interview takes place. So the public
when you interview him this week, I mean, that's sort of the final thing. I mean, the American people want accountability here, Mr. Chairman. Do you think this investigation goes away in the House once you step down?
Well, that's a very good question, because if I were a Democrat, I'd be concerned about some of the actions taken by Mr. Comey and others in the FBI leading right up to the election, announcing a reopening of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email, and then announcing again immediately after that it was being shut down. I mean, there are a lot of things that we've learned in the background of that are going to come out as a part of this that I think should be of interest to every American, and every American should not want the FBI being weaponized, as some have claimed, by the Democratic Party when they, created the situation in which a dossier was then used by the FBI to get a warrant from the FISA court. These are all things that should concern every American in terms of protecting their civil liberties and making sure that their elections are free and fair, and we don't want to see the FBI handling investigations like they were in the future.
Well, look, I mean, it's a shame that it has come to this, where you only have a few weeks left, and now you're seemingly going to speak to him, because we know that there was FISA abuse, and we know that there was leaking against the law. So we'll be watching that. I am really interested in seeing whether or not he is going to keep that promise and speak to you later this week. We'll be watching. Let's talk a bit about what work you've got to get done before you step down, and of course you've got an upcoming deadline, and there's potential for a government shutdown. Do you expect you will have the money to fund the wall and the government will stay open past December 7th?
Well, I think the issue with regard to funding the wall is a matter of how many dollars are going to be agreed upon. In my opinion, that's important, but unfortunately what will probably not be a part of any final deal here is what the president and what the administration really needs, and that is closing of a multitude of loopholes that deal with issues like asylum fraud, that deal with issues like so-called catch and release, where people are given a hearing date, released in the interior of the country, and never show back up for their hearing. The President and the Department of Homeland Security are being very valiant, the Border Patrol, in stopping these attempted invasions at our port of entry there in San Ysidro, California. But that's not the right way to handle this. We need an agreement with Mexico, and we need our laws changed so that people who are not supposed to be in the United States can be returned home expeditiously.
Are you expecting a better rapport or agreements with the new president of Mexico and President Trump?
I don't know, but I know that there are serious discussions going on with that new administration. So I guess we can all be hopeful. This is not in Mexico's interest to have the situation down there as it is right now, and it's never in the interest of a country to be the transit for people coming across it, many of whom are known to be convicted criminals. Some are suspected terrorists. This is not a situation that's any better for Mexico than it is for the United States. So they ought to work together to work it out.
So are you expecting a government shutdown?
I hope not. I'm certainly going to be staying here till the end of my term to make sure that that doesn't happen. But it's also important that the parties all come to the table and be reasonable about those negotiations.
And then you've got an upcoming hearing with technology CEOs. You've got Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, testifying in front of your committee. Tell me about this and what you want to get from him. There's speculation that these technology companies, who are now more powerful than they've ever been before, are censoring conservative conversation. Is that your main issue?
That is one of a number of issues. There are also antitrust issues. There are also issues related to how Google and the other social media companies raise their revenues based upon what they put in front of the viewer. There are also privacy issues. We have a number of issues to discuss with Mr. Pichai, who was scheduled to come in on Wednesday. I expect that because of President Bush's state funeral on Wednesday that we'll have to put that off until next week. But we're expecting that to occur, and it's very, very important that it do occur.
So you'll put Sundar Pichai off till next week. What about Jim Comey? Does that get impacted from the H.W. Bush proceedings?
We expect that there will be days later in the week that we'll be able to do that. That doesn't require the entire Congress to be in session like a public hearing does. That we're still working on the details of that, but we expect that to occur later this week.
All right. We so appreciate your time.
Not during the funeral, but later.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for your time this morning and, of course, your great service to our great country. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Maria.
We will get reaction from the Democratic side of the aisle to what we've discussed with Chairman Goodlatte. Also, President Trump reaches a tentative trade truce with China's president this weekend, just a day after striking an agreement with the leaders of Mexico and Canada. All next, right after this.
There's a good possibility that a deal can be made, and that he is open to that. He is open to that. But having said that, some caveats, as always. Certain conditions have to be met with respect to fairness and reciprocity.
That was top White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow talking about the possibility of the U.S. making a trade deal with China. The deal now closer to reality after the Trump administration yesterday announced that it will temporarily hold off on a new round of tariffs aimed at Beijing. Hours after President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping met face-to-face at the G20 summit in Argentina last night. The 90-day ceasefire comes after months of escalating trade tensions that have rattled financial markets. Joining me right now is Pennsylvania Democratic Congressman Matt Cartwright, who is the newly elected co-chairman of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. He also sits on the House Oversight and Appropriations Committee. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, Maria. How are you?
I want to get your take on what took place in Argentina and certainly the USMCA deal as well. All very important issues for your constituents in Pennsylvania, not to mention the entire country. But first, on this day, as we remember George H.W. Bush, I know that you have fond memories as well.
Absolutely. We are in mourning as a nation. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, we are hard hit by the loss of President George H.W. Bush. I think it's going viral. His note to Bill Clinton on the succession of power when President Clinton took over, saying, I'm rooting hard for you. I mean, that is just exactly who President Bush was. And I appreciated the comments that you had Vice President Quayle at the top of the hour. The way he worked in a bipartisan way, he worked with the Democratic Congress. They worked to negotiate things, to move the nation forward, and in a low-key way, in a kind way. I'd like to see us all take a lesson from that because we have a lot of work to do in this country, and taking the cue from late President Bush wouldn't be a bad idea.
Well, I think that's a great sentiment, and most people would like to see the work get done and not the constant fighting back and forth. Let's talk about the work that needs to be done, Congressman, because this weekend the president signed this new USMCA deal replacing NAFTA with the leaders of Mexico and Canada. Are you expecting you and your colleagues to delay the ratification of that deal come the new Congress?
Well, here's the problem, Maria. We're all, of course, we're still getting used to President Trump's negotiating style, and maybe the delay with the China deal, the China tariffs, is a good example of, he has his own negotiating style. What we were hoping with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal was that there would be more improvement to it, that maybe we would step back from the deal and get a better deal, because the protections for labor and the environment are not there. I mean, they're limited, for example, to auto auto manufacturing and related industries. Well, that does, raising labor standards in Mexico with the auto industry does make sense. But what we're looking for is a broadening of that. I mean, we could use that as a pilot program, I suppose, but that can't be the end of the deal. We've got to improve on that, and I think that's what Democrats are looking for, because in places like northeastern Pennsylvania, where I'm talking to you from, we got hit hard by NAFTA. NAFTA bestowed many benefits on our nation, but it bestowed them unevenly, and it really hit the manufacturing sector in my part of the country very hard, and a lot of people lost their jobs, and they saw those jobs go to Mexico for one reason only, because you could get away with paying Mexican manufacturing employees $2 an hour as opposed to the 15 at the time or more in the United States. So we're looking for improvement on that deal. I don't want that to be the end of the story where it ended up right now.
So is it better than to just use the current NAFTA in place? Is that a better situation than actually moving to USMCA?
No, and President Trump promised that in his campaigning, that he would ditch NAFTA and he would make it better and make it stronger for American manufacturing workers. The current deal is a step in that direction, but it's got to be made a lot stronger. And what I'm looking for is President Trump to indicate that this is not the end of the line. This is not the deal that he's going to be satisfied with. We want to see President Trump sharpen his pencil and do a better job at helping American manufacturing workers. The current deal doesn't do that.
A couple of the changes, country of origin rules, automobiles must have 75% of their components manufactured in Mexico, the U.S., or Canada to get the free trade zero tariff status. 40 to 45% of automobile parts have to be made by workers who earn at least $16 an hour by 2023. And U.S. farmers are getting more access to the Canadian dairy market. The U.S. got Canada to open up its dairy market to U.S. farmers. Intellectual property and digital trade, the deal extends the terms of copyright to 70 years beyond the life of the author. So very specifically, what other industries do you want to see getting exposure in this deal away from the auto sector then?
Oh, absolutely. I love all those things, Maria. Don't make any mistake about it. I mean, doing that for wages for Mexican workers means that fewer jobs will be exported to Mexico just to get the cheaper wage rates. But absolutely every American manufacturing industry should be subject to that. I don't mind them trying a pilot program, a test program, limited to the auto manufacturing sector, but manufacturing in this country, it's not going to come as a surprise to you, Maria, that manufacturing is not only about automobiles in this country. It's every kind of thing that's ever made in the United States. That's what we're looking for, because this is the kind of industry. For example, here in northeastern Pennsylvania, it was television picture tubes. We lost a very important factory north of Scranton to Mexico, and it was because of the low wage rates they could get in Mexico in the mid-90s after NAFTA went into effect. TV manufacturing is not affected at all by this current deal. Everything that's made in this country ought to be subject to a better deal.
How long are you going to be willing to stretch this out before voting for this deal? I mean, the whole uncertainty of it on whether or not the Congress votes for ratification of USMCA will certainly unnerve markets.
Well, a lot of things will unnerve markets. What I'm really worried about with the markets are that this tax sugar high that we're experiencing now is going to dissipate. And in fact, a terrific economist, Ian Shepherdson, has said this. It's a sugar high, and what he's worried about is that we're going to head into recession. I think Vice President Quayle mentioned that at the top of the hour.
Right.
Look, if we head into a recession in this country, that hurts everybody.
Yeah.
This is a bigger danger to American workers than anything happening with the borders or immigration. If we head into a recession, that means your job may be at risk. And a recession doesn't help anybody. Democrats are not rooting for a recession. We're rooting for success in this country, just the way President Bush was rooting for the success of Bill Clinton when he took over as president.
So the question becomes, are you going to move to raise taxes, and does that bring on a recession? Stay with us, Congressman. We're going to slip in a short break, and then we're going to get into it on the economy and, of course, that China deal that we heard about between the president and President Xi when we come right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. James Comey filing a lawsuit against a GOP subpoena, calling for him to testify behind closed doors. The former FBI director is insisting that he appear in a public hearing for the sake of transparency. My next guest says that Comey is demanding special treatment and trying to run out the clock until the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees shift to Democratic control come January. Joining me right now in a Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is Republican Congressman from Virginia, Bob Goodlatte. He is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you, Maria, and your viewers.
Do you really think you are going to be able to speak to Jim Comey this upcoming week, sir?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I expect that later today, Mr. Comey will withdraw his motion to quash our subpoena and agree to voluntarily appear for a transcribed interview. That, of course, remains to be seen. It hasn't happened yet, but the counsel for the House and the counsel for Mr. Comey have been working cooperatively, and I expect that will happen. If it doesn't, there is a hearing set tomorrow morning, and based upon the precedent, including very clear United States Supreme Court precedent, I'm confident the court will rule in favor of the House and protect the House's right to issue subpoenas and not allow witnesses to dictate the terms under which they would appear before the Congress.
Well, let me just go back to what you just said, because this is breaking news. You are expecting Jim Comey to withdraw his motion to push back and, in fact, sit for a private hearing sometime later this week. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's the expectation. That's been the basis of discussions that are going on, and we'll await it actually happening, but that is what I believe will happen.
Why do you believe this?
Because the parties have been working together. I think that the strength of the presentation made by Tom Hungar, the House counsel, on Friday, and the House's brief is very compelling, and I think that that is where the parties are headed in their discussions right now.
Where is this going to get you regardless, Mr. Chairman? I mean, look, in all due respect, we have been with you, this program has, all year, as you have scrutinized the handling of the Hillary Clinton investigation and the Trump-Russia collusion investigations of the FBI and the DOJ. And here we are, literally 3 or 4 weeks before you step down, and now you subpoena these two. I mean, couldn't you have done this sooner? What took so long?
Well, we certainly couldn't have done it sooner. We've now examined thousands of pages of documents, searched through nearly 1 million documents, interviewed 16 other witnesses. Mr. Comey is, as the former FBI director, at the center of both of these investigations, launched in 2016 with regard to Hillary Clinton and the Trump campaign. And it's the culmination of that. We've been asking for Mr. Comey to appear for a few months now, and when he refused to appear voluntarily for a transcribed interview, I was forced to issue a subpoena, which he now has sought to quash. That's, in my opinion, inappropriate, and now it's time for us to conduct that interview. After that interview, we do need to wrap up, but I will also say that there are always more questions that people will have, and that's why I'm pleased that Senator Lindsey Graham, who's expected to be the next chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Chairman Ron Johnson of the Senate Oversight Committee have both expressed very strong interest and intentions to me to continue to pursue this matter. So we do need to wrap it up. We do need to get this information out to the public, and we are hard at work on doing that. But Mr. Comey's testimony is a critical part of that.
What are you going to find out from Jim Comey? What are the most important questions you need to ask him?
Well, I'm going to save those for Mr. Comey, but you can imagine that you have a 400-page Inspector General's report. You have the testimony of 16 other witnesses, all of which were taken in private transcribed interviews. You have the thousands of pages of documents. Those have generated literally hundreds of questions that need to be asked, and we are prepared now with some very experienced former prosecutors like Trey Gowdy and John Ratcliffe and very experienced investigative staff to ask those questions and get to the bottom of this answer. We want to follow this matter. We want to follow the truth where it leads, and then we want to make these transcripts available to the public so that they can draw their own conclusions about what occurred in 2016. I'm concerned, and it's my hope that by doing this we will prevent it from happening again in 2020 or hopefully ever again. The FBI was misused in 2016, and this is an organization that is very, very important. Every day, thousands and thousands of great FBI agents and others protect us from terrorist attacks, prevent crimes, solve crimes. This organization has been hit hard, and they need to be rehabilitated. And let me just say, Christopher Wray, the new FBI director, I think has done a job of making major personnel changes at the top, and in terms of taking the Inspector General's report to heart and making changes so that this kind of thing won't happen again.
Mr. Chairman, stay with us because we've got more to talk about on this, as well as want to get your upcoming comments that you're going to be talking with the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, as well, on whether conservatives are being censored online. We'll get your take on a potential government shutdown as well. Stay with us. More with Bob Goodlatte when we come right back on Sunday Morning Future.